All right, welcome back. This is the Something About Your podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today is Darian Shirazi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate this. This is great. Darian started his not very long career at Facebook, founded a company which was Radius Intelligence. As an angel, somehow got in the mix, investing, advising a bunch of folks like Udemy, Lyft, Carbon Health, Palantir, and then ended up as a general partner at Gradient Ventures. And we'll explain what that is. We want to spend more time these days. A lot of people have asked me to talk more about AI and get people's thoughts on that, and we'll explain how Darian and Gradient fit into that. But I thought I'd start. You really got your career kicked off pretty early at Facebook. I was at 17. I was a lifeguard summers. How did you get? Did you get to Facebook at some absurd young age?
I did, yes. I got recruited to join them. Actually, I had an introduction from one of my cousins, Hadi Partovi, who is a pretty well-known angel
Yeah.
investor and founder. And he introduced me to Sean Parker, who introduced me to Mark Zuckerberg. And I, at the time, was actually interested in joining another company called OQO, which was creating a Palm-top computer that could run Windows XP. And I was very excited to write device drivers for that business. But that company was in San Francisco. My parents lived in Menlo Park, and Facebook was in Palo Alto. So my dad said, join this Facebook company and save yourself the commute. So I got very lucky with my selection of companies to
Right.
join. And my father had been sort of steeped in entrepreneurship and venture capital for many years. And so he sort of recommended that I ask for equity instead of getting paid, which I thought was silly at the time, but turned out to be a very good decision, and one that I thank him for every day.
That's fun. Isn't it funny? Just a flick of the wrists. You could have been at the other company. No problem. I have a friend who very early on was really considering whether to go to these two brand new companies, and one of them was Gulf Web, which was
Golf Web.
Gulf Web. It was all things golf on the web, and the other one was eBay. And he went to
Interesting.
eBay. Went to eBay, so it worked out. And at Facebook at the time, so this was not. Was Facebook inevitable at this time, or was this when it was like, oh, I don't know, MySpace is going to kill them, and there's going to be Bebo in Europe, or was this when it was like, nah, Facebook's going to take over the world?
So we definitely had, or at least the people that were there, we thought that we were working on something very special. We thought we were working on something specifically for college students at the time. And it wasn't clear what was going to ultimately happen because MySpace was, I think, 80 million users at the time. Everyone was talking about Tom and MySpace. And Facebook, I think, was about 2 million users. It was a very engaged audience, and it was clearly a special community, but it wasn't clear that it was going to be this monster company that it ended up being. But one thing that was certain is that Mark was very unique and very determined, and he was a founder that understood what the customers actually wanted, what the users really wanted, and he had sort of a sage understanding of what exactly the users are going to want to see. Newsfeed was definitely something that he had come up with, and I joined well before Newsfeed existed, and we spent a lot of effort on building Newsfeed, and it was something that I think revolutionized the way that we all interact.
Mm.
And he was right. And so I think it comes down to the fact that yes, there was a very special community at the time, but there was definitely uncertainty around what MySpace would do and whether it was actually we had the capacity to overtake them.
Right.
But during my tenure, it became more and more clear that Facebook was just going to ultimately be the largest company in the social space
Yeah.
and sort of win the battle.
And what is it? What's going on with your dad when you say, I'm leaving? You're going to UC Berkeley, right?
Yeah, yeah.
For people who listen around the world, we call that Cal here. So you're going to
I,
Cal.
I call it Cal, but no one really seems to know it outside of the Bay Area as
Yeah,
Cal.
exactly. Yeah, I went to Northwestern, and it's 50-50 whether people confuse it with Northeastern, which is a school in Boston. But anyway, so you say to your dad, well, I've been here 2 years at college. That seems like enough. I'm leaving. Why not wait 2 more years and finish the degree? What was kind of animating that urgency to get to one of
Yes.
these companies?
So, my dad had been an entrepreneur. He went to Stanford Business School, and his closest friends at Stanford Business School were Vinod and Scott, actually from Sun. and he was supposed to join them, but the revolution in Iran happened in 1979, right during when he was getting his MBA at Stanford, and he needed income, and all of the financial support he was getting from his parents ultimately went away during the sort of uncertainty around the revolution in Iran. So he had to get a job, and he ultimately went and became a consultant at Bain and Company, and he wasn't able to take the risk that he wanted to take. And he saw all of these successful people have the ability to take that risk. And so he sort of encouraged me to take a lot of risk in
Wow.
my career, whether it was starting a company. And, I don't think I would have taken those risks without his advice in that regard. So I got very lucky because he had seen a series of people. When he went to Bain and Company, his pod colleagues were Scott Cook and Meg Whitman. And
Wow.
so he had
How'd things turn out
those
for
turned
them?
out very well, right? And he could have angel invested in those companies, but he didn't have the financial means at the time. He was very young, didn't have the financial support, and so ultimately he said to me, like, Silicon Valley is one of these special places where risk is rewarded more so than other industries and in other geographies. And so he encouraged me to take those risks. And I wanted to drop out of school to start a company, so I
Yeah,
did. I was still working at Facebook while I was at Cal, but I never really went to school, to be honest. I kept
right.
delaying it. And I didn't like school. I didn't really
Yeah,
understand the concept of, oh, I'm going to work really hard to get a grade. Like, that didn't really make sense to me.
right.
So I was eager to get out into the real world and build things. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the reasons why I was so it was so easy for me to leave school.
So I think I see where this is headed. So you have a perfectly good job at Facebook, which seems like a perfectly good company that's growing perfectly well, and you decide to leave. And how long did you stay at Facebook?
It was about 2.5 years,
Yeah.
but Sean Parker sort of cut me a really nice deal in that he vested me in a shorter time period because the expectation was that I was going to go to school. And Mark was like, you should at least do some school. Like, you shouldn't just completely not go to college at all. I mean,
Right.
I think one of the things about Mark is that he's highly ethical, and he really, he really cares about the people he works with. So
Yeah.
he sort of wanted me to have the opportunity to go experience college without feeling like I was giving something up. So it was
Right.
I mean, I have to say, I sort of hit the jackpot, and I got very lucky with so many great people around me. It just doesn't always happen that way. And I was very fortunate.
Yeah. And well, you also got lucky swimming in, as your dad had pointed out, a very opportunity rich pool, which is Silicon Valley, which is it's a unique thing in all the world. I mean, I've run companies in a lot of different places around the world, and people try to put together innovation centers. And I can't say it nearly as well as like Mark Andreessen says it, but he'll list like the 10 things you need to have anything like Silicon Valley. And Singapore or Dublin, they're like, well, we can do two of those, you
Right.
know. And he's like,
It's
well,
true.
all right, go build your innovation center and see how that goes.
Yeah, it goes back to one of my favorite New York Times articles about Bill Gates, where it sort of discusses the concept of return on luck. Is that you have to have the sort of underlying capabilities or tenets to lead to a lucky outcome, and you need to seize those. And so Silicon Valley gives you that. There are no other places that I can think of at the moment, and there are other cities that have tried or gotten close, as you say. I think London, Berlin, New York, these are places where there are a lot of these characteristics, but still Silicon Valley is so unique.
Yeah. And I say this all the time. Like you see people in other places, but Silicon Valley, you'll be, in a cafe or talking to some entrepreneur and they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna, create nuclear fusion and then the chip is gonna like change the world. And instead of what you normally like, okay, well, that's ridiculous. You're like, well, okay, maybe you might
Yeah,
like,
it's possible.
and you kind of just get into that mindset where somebody tells you something, oh, I'm gonna knock Salesforce out and it's gonna be this new thing. And you don't just dismiss it, which is just kind of this mindset that you forget that you have after a while, but there it is. And maybe that's not as easy to have in other cultures. I don't know. So you
Yeah.
leave and you start a company that raises a ton of money. How did
Mhm.
that like how did that go? I think I was still a lifeguard at this point in my career, by the way, but in any case, you
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I started a company and I didn't realize how difficult it would be. I wanted to build a business in B2B. So I felt as though it was easier to get to demonstrable traction through B2B because consumer products, it's very binary. You either find the customer, there are a lot of things that have to go right. Whereas in B2B, you can control a lot more things. I wanted to do something in data and analytics because I had worked with Jeff Hammerbacher at Facebook when he started the data team. He had gone on to start Cloudera, which was wildly successful.
Yep.
And so I sort of landed on this concept of let's build a B2B marketing business. I know that sounds odd, but I was fascinated by the concept of disrupting Dun and Bradstreet, which was the sort of incumbent 100-year-old company that has all of the data around business credit, business data. And I felt as though that was a huge challenge in the CRM space. If you try to build out your CRM, you don't know which businesses to contact. The phone numbers are bad. Also, understanding which businesses are the right buyers of your products or services is very difficult. And so my co-founders and I that I knew from Cal, we had basically come up with this concept of, well, everyone has the best business data in every CRM if it was combined together. And so can we build a business where we actually link everyone's CRMs together to create a golden B2B data set of the best business information out there, similar to like a credit bureau, but for the purposes of CRM data. And this was a novel concept at the time and involved a lot of data and analytics work. And we raised a bunch of money from some great investors, and we grew the business to significant revenue. We were, well above 10 million in ARR. We had hired some of the best people, I think, in the space at the time. We had customers like Comcast, American Express, First Data, and our largest investor by dollar amount was actually Salesforce. And what ultimately ended up happening was Salesforce offered to buy the company for hundreds of millions of dollars when I was on honeymoon. And we actually agreed to sell the business, and then they walked away literally at the last second. And it was very difficult to sort of, repatch up the company, and we successfully did, and then realized an outcome which was favorable, but it was a hell of a time. And I think it was one of the largest crises that I had ever experienced. I still to this day don't really know like why they decided to move on. I think it has, and not buy the company. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Mark Benioff changes his mind on things very quickly. And it was a devastating time. But I persevered, I feel like. And it was also something where I feel like we built a lot of amazing technology. We built a great business, and we ultimately trusted the wrong people. And I think that, one of the things about Silicon Valley is that people don't realize how many crises there are, how many bad things happen to companies. And I learned so much. It actually prepared me to be, I think, a really good venture capitalist, in the sense that I've seen a lot of things not work out well in my own experience. I've built a company from, the ground up, worked on it for 8 years, and then gotten to a point where, where it was actually at scale. And so I'm quite, that's kind of the background on the company, and we built some amazing technology. And I'm really excited by what everyone has gone on to do as a result of after the sale. Like pretty much everyone ended up being successful and working on interesting new projects. Some of the companies I've funded are former Radius employees. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing in Silicon Valley. First of all, it's fairly rare. I don't know if people understand this. Most venture capitalists, some are, but most aren't actual founders. They'll use the term operator, which means they worked at a company that somebody else founded or whatever. But to actually have been through that experience, and what's interesting, bad things happen, and the number of companies, and you don't hear about it. You hear about the successful acquisitions, but the number of times, and I don't know why it happens. Maybe Benioff, changes his mind here, but the number of times I've experienced it or seen somebody go through that, they go through this. They're okay. We're done. We're going to be wealthy. They're buying us, and they go through this whole process, and like at the last minute, it unravels, and it's just it's just spitting that energy back up is so difficult after you change your mindset. And it's really hard to contemplate how that happens, because you're like, well, they didn't learn anything about us. I mean, unless you were just committing fraud, but they didn't learn anything about you, after 6 months of doing their diligence, and like the wheel just turns,
And they were an investor for years. And so, it happened. It's definitely, it definitely seems to happen a lot more often than I expected. And yeah, it's definitely, there are a lot of investors, a lot of buyers that have walked away from companies I've invested in too. Like it definitely happens.
Is there, what thing do you feel like you learned there? It's a ridiculous question, but whatever. You learned there that you realize looking back, like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg was probably like, I was running around being an engineer and that was cool, but the founder was dealing, okay, that's different. Like, was there something that you took away from the pain of building a company?
Yeah, I think it like sort of allowed me to understand what are the markers of a great founder. It's every company is going to go through a series of crises, and so what you have to do is you have to find a founder that is resilient. You have to find a founder that is trustworthy. You have to find a founder that is going to go that extra mile to really that is really going to be able to succeed. Also, I think you have to learn things that you wouldn't normally necessarily have to learn. You have to learn how to run a finance organization. You have to learn how to build products. You have to learn how to run a product management organization. So being able to, and there are many other things, being able to understand those different pieces and being able to have a founder that has all three of those characteristics, the resilience, the trustworthiness, and also being an autodidact, those three things are very rare. And
Right.
it's something that I look for in the founding teams that I invest in, because ultimately you just don't know what's going to come your way. It may be a shift in priorities. It may be a shift in an investor may walk away from a term sheet. A buyer may walk away from a term sheet. You may lose a critical employee. You will lose a critical employee.
Yeah.
This is just how companies are. And so that's what I really look for now, and what I've looked for in all of my angel investments and venture investments.
So you angel invest and then become a venture capitalist, a gradient. How does that happen? And can you kind of explain for people what gradient is in the in the realm of venture capital firms?
Sure. So Gradient is a AI focused venture capital fund that is backed by Google. And we've been in business for about 5 years. We now have invested in about 150 companies. I think some of our biggest wins are quite impressive. Streamlit was acquired by Snowflake for 800 million. And we're the first investor there. We have Mural, which is one of the largest whiteboarding and workplace collaboration products. That's worth $2 billion. We did the Series A there. We've also seeded a number of very interesting companies in the AI space at the application layer and the infrastructure layer. So we set out with the promise of being a founder first fund that seeds and gets founders to product market fit and really helps them find product market fit with a series of operational support. But all of the partners at the firm are former founders. We've done the work to actually build companies, gone through crisis ourselves. And that is a unique proposition I think we bring to the table, is that most of the venture capitalists that are out there that are doing seed Series A, I would say more than 50% probably haven't started a company before and probably haven't gone through the trenches and know what that means. So a lot of the things that we do for our founders are interview top talent for them. I've interviewed hundreds of VPs of marketing or VPs of sales in my career, and I do that for our founders all the time. Or helping them with customer introductions, helping them understand how to pitch and raise the next round of funding. I think that having founders that are the partners and also people that have had founder exposure that are on the team, that is really lent itself well to us building a firm that is the go-to partner for AI founders.
Yeah.
And we were doing things in AI before it was
Well,
successful,
I was
before
going
it
to
was
ask you this.
exciting, right?
So how do you pick an A? So you joined, I don't know, not last October or whenever AI took off. You joined a few years before. What did move you toward choosing a pretty at the time pretty unique? Right now everyone's got .ai on there, But why did you pick an AI firm at the time?
Yeah, so as I said, I had always been interested in data and analytics from my Facebook days. I saw the level of work that was being done to generate newsfeed and how interesting that was, where if you actually had a clean data set, which Facebook was unique in the sense that we had a really clean data set around attributes of profiles, right? We were not like MySpace where you could design your profile and you could write free form text. Like the profile was structured data. So you could do a lot of interesting things with that structured data. So I sort of saw that evolution, whereas if you had clean data, if you had great training data, you could actually build interesting products. So through my tenure at Radius and also through my angel investing, I said the next super cycle has to be AI. It has to be something that involves leveraging structured data for the purposes of building intelligent applications. And so when I was looking at VC funds to join, this was an obvious choice to be part of, because I felt as though the super cycle was going to arrive. And what better to be 4 years ahead of that
Yeah.
than to join, and once everyone had thought AI
Right.
was interesting. And
Well,
I'd
this is
never
the,
really
yeah.
been interested in crypto. I'd never
I
really been
was
interested.
I was
Yeah, it
just
was like not
I was
me.
just
It
gonna
was
say the
so
obvious thing at the time would be the hot Web3 things.
yeah, exactly. And so the reality is that it was to me going to be the next super cycle, and I said, what better to spend my next set of
Right.
years on that wave. And so we get to now see, and have seen over the past 5 years, some of all the interesting AI companies.
Yeah.
And we've been able to sort of be front and center with the support of Google as our main investor, and also with the level of portfolio that we have in the AI space, to really see the best companies that come to the table. And it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Over the past year, especially because everyone has pivoted to
Right.
AI, everyone's building all these interesting applications on top of LLMs. And I think we're just at the beginning. I know Jonathan won't like this, but I usually say we're in the Friendster era of
Yeah.
this cycle. So I think the next wave is going to be a set of interesting companies that are
Yeah.
built that will be the next billion-dollar
Yeah.
businesses.
Jonathan is my business partner who founded Friendster, early social network, and yeah, being the first isn't always isn't always the best. But what would you say for somebody who's just started hearing about AI and kind of understands that there's software and there's AI? What is AI? What is the defining characteristics of people building AI software versus people who are just building MySpace and Facebook, so many years ago?
Yeah, so I think it's leveraging data to create an application that can reason in some capacity. That's sort of how I define it, is that leveraging data to create something that is intelligent, or create something that can reason, almost similar to a human. It's not, and that's what we look for, is we look for any sort of product that is going to have the ability to reason better than a last era SaaS
Yeah.
application, or any infrastructure that enables a reason or intelligent application to be built. That's sort of how I think about it.
And so what happened? Yeah, so we're all, Web3, crypto, market comes down, dark times, and all of a sudden, I don't know, to the east on the horizon, this thing emerges. ChatGPT comes out. But what happened in October of 2022 that didn't happen in 2014, 2017? Like, what happened?
So I think it comes down to the transformer paper, which came out from Google, basically, which was the concept of predictive text, the concept of using predictive text to translate from one language to another. But I think what Sam and Greg Brockman at OpenAI did is they had the foresight to realize that if you applied that to predictive text for the purposes of asking questions and reasoning, you could very quickly get an intelligent application out of that. And if you continue to add more and more language and more words as the underlying text for the predictive model, you could ultimately create a system that was somewhat intelligent and could reason and could answer questions the way a human would. And they continued to throw more and more text at that model, at that concept that the transformer paper outlines. And they got to a point late last year where they had thrown enough text at it, enough underlying data at it, that it was quite smart.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, let's launch it as a consumer product and see what people do with it. And they were right.
Yep.
But if you look at the evolution, GPT-2 and before that, it wasn't smart enough. It didn't have enough sort of underlying text to make it answerable, to make it interactive. So I sort of think about it as a child. It's sort of, I have an 8-month old. It's sort of he babbles right now, but soon enough he'll be able to talk, and then he'll make reasoned sentences, and then he'll be able to actually explain things and be conversational. We have seen a computer version of raising that kid.
Yeah.
And we are seeing that over time as we add more and more underlying intelligence and more underlying text to these models, they can get smarter and smarter. And I think we hit an inflection point late last year where it was smart enough where people said, oh, this can actually answer real human questions. This can actually be interactive. Similar to that inflection point that a human has when they go from being just a child or a baby to being someone that is someone you can have a conversation with and reason with. And that inflection point, I think, just happened to be late last year. And I think we're going to continue to see these models get better and better as they're able to compute through more text, as they're able to have more access to more content.
Is part of what happened here that people, tens of millions, 100 million, whatever it is, that people basically finally saw it, and then it opened their imagination in a way where you could explain, mobile phones to people all day long, but until, Travis or whatever the story is of Uber being founded, until you press a button and the car shows up, it's all like blah, blah, blah. You can do payments, blah, blah, blah. There's GPS. And then you see it and your brain goes, aha, that's
exactly.
But millions of people doing this.
Exactly. And I remember seeing the Uber seed deck. It was like, no one's going to do this. And that's what everyone thought. And
hey, no one will get in a stranger's car. You talk about
exactly.
early social networks. Friendster, nope. People are never going to put a photo of themselves online. There's one for you.
Exactly. No one's going to share photos of their kids online, and no one's going to write a blog. No one's going to tweet. There was a lot of naysayers around all these technologies, and they always seem like kind of toys initially, but they ultimately, once they captivate a large enough audience, they ended up being quite interesting, which is exactly what's happened with ChatGPT.
Well, and I think for chat, so let me ask, so here's my experience. I'm curious, like now that we're a few months in, when I use ChatGPT, I find sort of three things happen. One, it's just magical. It just does something and you're like, okay, I think that's a person. Like, I know it's not, but it feels like that. Sometimes I'm like, okay, this isn't really necessary. Like if I'm looking for taco shops nearby, Google search is fine. I don't really know if I need paragraphs, beautiful paragraphs about it. And then sometimes I get a result that's just crazy. Like I was asking one of them, Bard, ChatGPT, and they have it on good authority that Kent Lindstrom, founded Stripe in 2014. Everyone knows I founded it in 2015. So no, I mean, like just crazy, like kind of crazy stuff. I'm wondering, do you think people's experience are going from the magical to the more like, okay, this is a little early days, or what's your sense?
Yeah, so I think that some of these models and some of these bots are hallucinating a lot, and they're hallucinating mainly because they don't have enough content and the weights have not been adjusted properly to make sure they respond factually. That will get sorted out, and I think there are companies that have a better advantage and some that don't in making sure that those hallucinations are reduced. So if you think, like, my belief is that ultimately Google is best positioned to sort of build the right product that is the safest and the most effective and the most factual because of the historical data that they've had in search for so long. And I think that that's what we're going to see is we're going to see better and better products that are going to continue to be developed in this space. Right now, there are some questions that are not going to be answered correctly, but that's what happens in the early days of a product, right? Like we had a similar issue at Facebook where what do we do with fake profiles? What do we do with spam? What do we do with people that are uploading photos that we don't want them to upload? But ultimately, these things get figured out. So I'm very optimistic that the solutions will improve.
I have this weird feeling about the hallucinations, which is, I don't know, they seem like, and again, I know I know it's not real, but it seems like the AI wants to make me happy. Like it seems to be putting together information that makes me look good, which I just find that interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, I think also because most of the content about people biographically is positive in the world, so it's
Right.
learning like it's learning from content that already exists, right? You write a biography about Ben Franklin, it's mostly positive things, but there probably are a lot of bad things that happened around him or that he may have done that like don't get included in the biography because they're not as engaging and they're not things that necessarily people want to read.
Yeah.
So, I think that if you're training a bot purely on local news, it might be more negative because that content tends to be more negative. So it really depends on where that training set came from.
So in AI, from your perch, where do you think interesting things and again, VC, you're not supposed to predict, you're supposed to let the entrepreneur tell you the future. But where do you think the interesting areas are, in the sense that my understanding is that you have things that require hundreds of millions of dollars of compute, NVIDIA chips that probably Google or Facebook or Microsoft needs to do. And then the criticism of a lot of the early, startups is it's a pretty thin layer of technology on top of Chat GPT, and the magic your experience is really mostly Chat GPT. Where do you think, once the haze clears a little bit, an entrepreneur, somebody starting a company where he or she is going to have 5 people working for 2 years, interesting things are likely to happen?
Yeah, so I think that the foundational models are going to be a cloud service. That's sort of how I think about it, is that you'll have a few foundational models that you can pick from. Like if you're starting a company, do you build on GCP? Do you build on AWS? Do you build on Azure? Which cloud services do you use? Those are what I think is going to happen. And ultimately, for example, Adam D'Angelo's company, that's what they're doing, right? They're giving you the ability to try all these different models because ultimately they're going to be good at different things, and they will be the foundation of applications that get built on top. And I encourage people to try It's pretty cool. You can test a response from Anthropic Claude or from Bard or from OpenAI's solutions and other models as well. So there will be a small number of these foundational models that will be the universe, and it'll be a cloud service that you build on top of. But then I think there are going to be a series of vertical applications that will disrupt different industries. So there will be, for example, I was the first investor in Case Text, which was building on top of OpenAI the ability for lawyers to have a co-pilot, right? And Thomson Reuters just bought that company for 650.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also got companies that are doing it in the e-discovery space even. So law is this area that I think there's going to be a huge amount of disruption and change because of the verticalized applications that are on top of these foundational models. You're going to have things in the EHR space and in the medical space. I just invested in a company that's doing, hospital automation for like sort of triage to ask questions and answers about what to do with certain conditions. And I did that personally. And then we've also got other sectors, I think, that are going to be disrupted by these foundational models. But the most of the startups will be these vertical applications that sit on top of it. There will also be horizontal applications that maybe are in security, or that maybe are in the ability to plug and play these different types of foundational models. Like LangChain is a horizontal solution that everyone's been talking about. Or you're going to have prompt injection protections that are going to be sort of horizontal as well. But I think every business vertical, there will be a CRM that is more intelligent than the CRMs that exist today. That will be a vertical. So I think that's where I'm spending most of my time, is who are the best founders that are excited about building the next generation of applications in each vertical that are based on these foundational models.
And what would an investor, not investment advice or anything like that, but what can an investor do? You hear about AI, assume a really, somebody who has access to every kind of investment opportunity in the world. Where can you invest? I guess you just buy NVIDIA stock and Facebook stock. It seems like none of these companies have made it to the Series B and Series C. Like, where is where would someone put dollars in the next 3 years? A seed stage investing in venture or public markets, or later? Like,
yeah, so I sort of think that if you're trying to allocate capital and you're trying to decide where to invest today, there's going to be a few areas where value will accrue. The cloud vendors is one. So I think that, you can't go wrong buying those stocks. I think that there's going to be a limited amount of GPUs for compute. And so NVIDIA, I still think, is a fantastic company. AMD is a fantastic company. I think the demand for compute is going to continue to accelerate. I don't think it's going to decelerate anytime soon. And even if we solve the chip shortage, there will still be increased demand. I think also that in the seed stage, working with really great fund managers that you believe can pick the best founders, that's going to be a sector as well. I think that if you're thinking about allocating capital to seed companies directly and you aren't in the seed business,
Okay.
I think that's a little nuts because ultimately everyone that was doing crypto last year is now doing AI. And so it's hard to decipher like which ones are the real companies. That you want to find managers that meet hundreds of founders a month and that can determine which ones are the best founders.
Yeah. What so let me ask you, kind of wrap up a little bit here, but ask you what in terms of AI risk. I saw a pretty interesting. I was in The Economist or something, asking people about existential risks, and they would ask the general population, how risky do you think this thing is, and then they would ask people who are experts in the field. And so, for nuclear power, for example, the general public thought it was quite risky. And then you talk to people who work in the nuclear power field, and they actually thought it was far less risky than general public. But when it came to AI, when you talk to the general public, they didn't know or didn't think it was that risky. But people who work in the field actually thought it becoming an existential threat was relatively quite risky. So if the experts in AI seem a little bit concerned, should we be concerned? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there are obvious risks, and there were also a lot of naysayers around data privacy during the social era. There were risks around that. There are going to be people that are scared and worried about these technologies. But I actually think the risk is higher that someone weaponizes AI than a bad actor. The more near-term risk is that we've seen so many hacks over the past 5 years that are dangerous, right? Like Microsoft or SolarWinds or whatever. And so effectively, I think that the bigger risk is that you have a bad actor that hacks into a military system. And that's what I really worry about more than anything else. So I think that we have to be very careful about securing AI systems, making sure that they aren't easily abused. And I think that the industry is doing actually quite a good job of that so far. But I think that the impacts to society on the positive are going to be a lot greater than the potential negatives. I think that we're seeing we're going to add a lot more jobs to the workforce as a result of automation, and we're also going to allow for the democratization of education. What people don't really see about LLMs is that they are multilingual. They have the ability to teach someone that doesn't speak English or that only speaks a language that is that is in a different part of the world, any concept that exists in English. And to me, the benefits of that are going to greatly outweigh the potential concerns that I have. Is that someone that lives in an economy where access to education was normally not there, where they didn't have the ability to understand any concept that was written in English because they speak a different language, they have a mobile phone and they have access to any of these LLMs, they can learn any topic that they want to
Right.
learn. And to me, that is an underestimated demonstrable change that will happen in the economy, because people that are born in countries that don't have access to education or that grow up in a very poor community, they didn't have the ability to learn any concept. Now they can. You can learn to code in any language now because of these LLMs. You can learn any scientific concept because of these LLMs. And that is, to me, going to outweigh any of the risks.
The scale is hard to envision. When the social networks were starting, people, sort of like, well, there could be 100 million people on this someday. This could be worth $250 million someday. And then you realize, no, 4 billion people on the internet can use your product or service tomorrow. And your
Yep.
company could be worth $1 trillion. And every brain in the world can have access to something that can teach them in any language they speak. You kind of, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine a lot of things, but hard to imagine how profound that really is and how profound that's really going to be.
Yeah, I think so. We underestimated it with mobile, that's for
Yeah.
sure. Is that the reason that there are billions of people on social networks is because of mobile. Not everyone people buy a mobile phone before they would ever buy a desktop these days.
Yeah.
People are going to use those mobile phones to teach themselves any concepts. They're going to use it to advance their careers. They're going to use it to advance their understanding of the world or anything that they are curious or interested about. And to me, that is a huge change in the world, because now we're giving the ability for someone to learn any concept. There are probably multiple Einsteins that have never been discovered
Right.
in the world because of lack of access to education. Now we are going to discover those people because they're born into communities where they didn't have access to education and now they do.
So as we've moved into this world of, I'm just curious what you think about this because I think you were early into kind of Bitcoin. I won't say crypto more.
Somewhat, but like I said, I was not a crypto person. It was sort of I dabbled in it.
Well, let me ask you this: with or crypto now? I mean, we had this thing where all these people, all these entrepreneurs have gone to crypto and Web3, and then during the most recent Y Combinator, known as YC class, it happened, and then everyone kind of pivoted. Is crypto just on the wayside of history, or Web3 kind of just not where an entrepreneur is going to put their energy now, or what?
So I think there are practical applications of decentralized computing, and I do think that there is a world for digital money in some respect. Bitcoin is popular enough where people are going to use it to transmit money, and there's enough of a belief that there is value in it. It's similar to gold. Is like, why is gold valuable? It's because we all believe gold is valuable. Similar, even if you can, yes, you can touch it, you can hold it, but that's not the real intrinsic reason in my mind. It's that, hey, we all think that gold is valuable. And so the same thing has now happened with Bitcoin. I do think that Ethereum continues to be an interesting application, a layer where people can build the ability to have smart contracts where, hey, I can prove that this happened, and I can prove that I transmitted this amount of money, or I can prove that you did what you said you were going to do, and I can validate it across many different nodes. That technological concept, I think there are practical applications for, but there were also just a lot of scammy altcoins and things that didn't really make sense to me. What one application that I'm pretty excited about these days is the nexus of AI, ML, and Web3, which is the ability to do compute across, like the ability to have distributed compute. So people are going to be able to lease their GPUs on chain. People are going to be able to lease their computing power on chain. And that to me is an interesting application of blockchain. I've invested in one company in that space that's still in stealth. But in general, I think people got a little bit too excited in the crypto space, and I didn't really understand it. A lot of these white papers, if you read them, they don't make sense. And so I'm glad that we're now seeing a return to sort of reality.
And AI really does feel like one of the emergence of the internet, the emergence of mobile, maybe the emergence of cloud computing. It's early, but it really does feel like one of those, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It feels like we are at the beginning of a super cycle. It feels like the iPhone's just been launched because we don't know what people are going to build with it yet, and we're just starting to see the initial emergence of it. There's so many people that are trying to build, plug in your knowledge base and get a chatbot out. There's so many of those companies, but the next era will be things we can't even dream yet, and I'm looking forward to seeing what those are.
You seem pretty excited. How do you like it now? You're a venture capitalist as opposed to being an entrepreneur. How does that sit with you? How do you feel about it?
So I'd say the difference is that the highs are not as high and the lows are not as low when you're the investor. And there are times when you miss the feeling when you close a big customer, or when you solve a difficult problem, or when you hire a dream candidate, or when you announce a new product. It's not the same when you're the investor. You get some of the excitement, but you don't get all of it.
You get to tweet
And
about it.
yeah, you get to tweet about it. My job is, I tweet about my companies. That's
Right.
basically my job. No, I'm kidding. But I also think that for me, it's a little bit unique in that I had such a difficult go as an entrepreneur, and I had such while we did end up selling the company and it was a fine outcome, it was a difficult last couple of years. I saw a lot of destruction. I had to do layoffs.
Yeah.
It was not fun. And so for me, it's just enough of the highs and just enough of the lows to stay sane. And so I don't see myself ever starting a company again. But there are days where I miss the feelings that I used to get when it was my company and my co-founders' company that I was spending the majority of my time on. So it's different, but also enjoyable.
Well, you certainly have a great perch to see what's going on in this pretty exciting time. I really appreciate you doing this. How do people, it should be kind of obvious maybe, how do people find you? Is it Twitter? Is it a blog? Is it how should people find you with their AI ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think find me on Twitter, find me on Threads. I hope
Yeah.
I'm the first person to offer that. My handle is Darian314 on both networks, and send me ideas. Send me an email, Darian@gradient.com. And I'm excited to meet more founders. It's my favorite thing to do every day. So, and thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for doing this. All right.
Yeah.
This is Selling About Your Podcast. Darian Shirazi is my guest. Talk to you next time.